Good morning. Thank you for coming to this talk today. I would have loved to have been here in person to give this talk, but if all goes well, I should be able to accept some live questions at the end of this talk. So please have your thinking caps on for me because I like the tough questions. And I like to talk today about why it's important for these social science theories and methods to be thought about for answering questions within the lab animal science community. It is one of these things. Like, I think what I would like to start by doing is to kind of go back to how I began to ask the questions about why. And I feel why is really an important grounding point for the lecture today. So many of you may know me and know that I spent nearly 20 years as a technician. And this time as a tech really shaped how I viewed the experiences of animals. And my experiences also changed how I viewed the challenges around improving the welfare of animals. And it's not just about the science behind what animals need or what animals want to be able to live happy lives, but it's also the why. The why are there barriers to these? And my time as a technician, I really began to notice that, different people did things differently. Different institutions did things differently. Different countries did things differently. And the question of why kept occupying my mind. And my training in zoology and then in population medicine didn't equip me to answer those questions of why. And these things brought me to the University of British Columbia, where I pursued the PhD in animal welfare. I was funded as a Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada Bombardier Scholar and a UBC Public Scholar. And I try to understand the social license to use animals in science and the role of institutional transparency. And here is where I really was able to tackle and learn the methodological skills needed to be able to start to answer the question of why. So, with that started, what are we going to do? So I want to take this lecture in three kind of parts. The first being providing a history of the three R's that I don't think that many people are aware of. So I'd like to kind of dive into this a little bit. And then I'm going to spend most of the time talking about examples from my empirical research and how I utilized social science theories and methodologies to be able to inform this empirical research that I've done. And then I would like to wrap up with the ability to have some questions and discussions around these things, because I feel discussion is imminently important. And that being said, I recognize that might not be possible today, or we may run out of time. And if those are the case, please reach out to me. I am more than happy to have ongoing discussions about it. I was really hopeful to be able to have had some discussions in person this week. So anyway, so let us begin with this history of the three R's that we might not be fully contextualized for us. So here's the book, The Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, right? Written by Russell and Birch, 1959. the story we all know from this, and I'm not going to spend any time on this, is replacement, reduction, refinement. The three R's. These are the cornerstone of the ethical framework for conducting animal experimentation within the current Western paradigm, right? So this is what we all kind of base this stuff on, along with some like utilitarian ethics for harm-benefit analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the part we know. So I want to take this and put a pin, or I guess it's on this side, a pin in Principles of Humane Experimental Technique for a second. And I want to just introduce you to another book that I don't think many people would probably know about. And this is a book by C.P. Snow. It's called The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution. It actually came out at the same time as Russell and Birch's The Principles. And what this book talked about is this widening schism between intellectuals in the humanities and the sciences. Just how at this time in the late 50s, scientific culture was just exploding. It just was like growing like nothing ever before, just with the advancements of technology and just all of these things. It just was like booming out. And there was just this expanding culture within the sciences and specializations into disciplines, and all these sub-disciplines and new things were being formed. And what this really began to do was this specialization caused a profound epistemological, linguistic, and, a lot of moral differences began to emerge between the sciences and the humanities. And what it really did was it began to hamper and impede mutual communication and understanding of the work that each of them do. And hold on, now you're saying like, okay, that's great, wonderful. I appreciate that history lesson from the 1950s, but what does that have to do with the principles of humane experimental technique? So let me just unpin that, and we'll come back to it now. And I'll say this, I raise this point because Russell was trained in the culture of what's called scientific humanism. And scientific humanism is a branch of science which assumes the epistemological orientation and moral outlook between the humanities and the sciences is shared, so that they mutually support and reinforce each other. And what that means is, for Russell, he was not only a zoologist, but he was also an expert in art. And so it was in history. He was from the time of this scientific humanism where to be an academic was to be well-rounded. And the only way for you to excel in, say, being a botanist is to also be an art historian, to also be a proper poet or linguistics person. You needed to also be very on the edge of chemistry, and you needed to be well-rounded, and everything spoke the same language and everything supported each other. So that was the training that Russell had. And when he wrote this book, it used extremely complex transdisciplinary thought and language and crossed borders and was all pulling from all these different places. And at the time of its publication, that sort of language and thought had lost all traction and all meaning because of this widening schism and gap between the way in which science and the humanities communicated with each other, right? So there was limited uptake on the principles at that time. Now, eventually, when the 3 R's was operationalized, it eventually found this acceptance as a contemporary framework for the ethical use of animals, right? And which was what we have now. And because of that, what it does is it provides this pragmatic mechanism that we all use in our animal care committees to evaluate animal research. And as I said, it's grounded within the basis of like utilitarian ethics. But why I talk about this and why I talk about this scientific humanism and the schism and blah is because the rationalization of the 3 R's, what it did was it actually disconnected it from its humanist roots. And it restricted the capacity for the humanities and the social sciences to be able to influence animal research in a meaningful way. And once the 3 R's was isolated from the context of the principles, it no longer provided this opportunity to question the moral acceptability of the use of animals for scientific research within this framework. So it's important for us to recognize the context in which the principles was written and where the 3 R's was come from. And remember that the 3 R's is only 3 chapters of this entire book. And that it has a deeper context, which is rooted within the humanities, social sciences, and sciences together. Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to resist the temptation to edit out all of these like things. So you're going to have to just deal with this, I think. So, Tuesday. Yeah, so yesterday, Dr. DeGracia would have talked about him and Beecham's principles of animal research ethics. And this, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it just because I'm assuming that he talked about this. But for those of you that may have missed it, this is a very new addition to this discussion. And it was published in 2020. And in here, they argue that in addition to scientific justification, moral justification is required for scientific experiments on animals. And the rationale for that primarily stems around that animals are typically harmed, they're unable to consent, and they undergo medically unnecessary procedures. So all of which these things would be considered unethical if they were utilized with human participants, right? So why do I bring this book up? I bring this book up because I really feel that this text has transformative potential. And this can really change the way in which we view the ethical framework to conduct scientific experimentation on animals. And I feel like this is a mechanism that can integrate the moral component, which I would argue is lacking currently in our current framework. And I'm happy to talk about that further. I just don't have as much time here. So on a side note here, why do I think this is so transformative? Because the last one that Beecham and another author wrote in 1979, the principles of ethics, like principles of biomedical ethics for humans. And these were based upon respect for autonomy, non-malfeasance, beneficence, and justice. And this text from 1979 is what all of our human ethics is based on now. It revolutionized human ethics and completely shifted the paradigm. So that's why I'm super hopeful that this book may also hold some of those things. So within this text, I'm just going to pull out just a couple things here. They talk about that investigators and other accountable parties have a professional responsibility to provide explicit moral and scientific justification for their proposed use of animals. So this is saying it's not just about scientific justification. researchers, PIs, need to provide moral justification as well. And it's incumbent upon them to do that. They go on to say that members of animal care and use committees likewise have a responsibility to evaluate the justification offered by these investigators and ensure they are adequate. So that then also reinforces that the role of an animal care committee is not just about ensuring that harms are minimized and that scientific justification is appropriate, but that moral justification is also met. And how do they go on to talk about being able to do this? Well, their animal subject framework consists of 6 principles under the core values of social benefits and animal welfare. And every single one of these needs to be justified in order for the research to be considered morally appropriate, right? So the prospect of social benefit must not be obtainable by an alternative method. That seems pretty normal. Present a net benefit for cost versus risk for humans. And that's kind of new in that if you can get the information in a more cost-effective or less risky way, then you need to do it that way. And the third one is to be of sufficient value to justify the harms to the animals. And that also is probably fairly, would be widely accepted as well. So additionally, under these core values, there is animal welfare, where the animals must not be subjected to any unnecessary harm. It seems reasonable. Be provided with basic species-specific needs. That's an important one. That's of growing impact, right? Our understanding of basic species-specific needs continues to grow, and not be caused to endure severe suffering for lengthy periods of time. So this is actually a big one too, right? Where imposing upper limits, upper thresholds of harms and things like that. So I think these are all super important. So these principles offer a starting place to begin to incorporate some of the humanities and social science perspectives to discuss not only scientific justifications for the use of animals, but also its moral justification, because some of these questions aren't easily answered, right? Like they're not easily answered, and they're value laden and contextual and differ between cultures and a lot of these things. So there is this opportunity to utilize these methodologies to be able to do this. And being able to incorporate this moral justification is super important, because that actually is functionally lacking, in my opinion, within the current 3Rs framework, which is used by animal care committees currently to justify the use of animals in science. So providing you guys with this brief theoretical background, what I'm trying to say is that the 3Rs was intended to evolve over time. And the social sciences and humanities were assumed by Russell to be on equal footing with other scientific disciplines in this respect, and the ability to contribute and to influence the 3Rs and the principles of humane experimental technique. To be able to do this, multidisciplinary approaches are needed. So the plan now is to show in a very real way some of these multidisciplinary methods that I've used as a demonstration of what can kind of come from this sort of stuff. Excuse me. All right. So in this first study, I'm going to talk about what I wanted to do? So with this first study, what I wanted to do was understand how the public could tangibly become involved in animal research processes, since current animal research governance structures don't offer broad opportunities for public participation. And I know that that sometimes can be a contentious statement, because people can say, oh, people can volunteer on animal care committees, they can contribute to public forums of like guidelines and things. And this is true, there are opportunities. However, I would contend and argue that these are extremely limited opportunities, and I wanted to be able to engage a much more broad overview, because individuals participating on these select committees does not really provide a comprehensive representation of society and various publics that are out there. So I can talk about that forever too. So I will accept that a common argument to this, right, it's probably what people are thinking right now, is that the process of like evaluating protocols and contributing to these scientific studies is a process that requires specialized training and a substantial amount of scientific literacy, and that the public just might not be capable of making any sort of meaningful contribution at all. And that's a valid point. Maybe that's true, but we haven't asked. So what I wanted to do was to assess the potential of providing non-technical summaries as a meaningful way of public consultation during animal protocol review of proposed research protocols. So what do we end up doing? So what I did was I provided, in a mixed method survey, 1,521 American participants, which was census matched to the American population. And they were randomly allocated into one of 5 different treatments. Each were describing either chronic pain research in mice, organ transplantation research in pigs, smoking research in mice, Parkinson's research in non-human primates, or, circling me, cancer research in zebrafish. So that is the things that we were looking at. And after reading, let me get rid of that. After they were read one of these non-technical summaries, we asked the participants, do you support the use of these animals for this research? And they responded on a 7-point Likert scale, with one being no, 7 being yes, and 4 being neutral, and they can answer anywhere on that 7-point scale, right? So I'm going to just this was the outcome of the quantitative survey. So I'll just briefly go through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the numbers part of it, because this presentation is mostly focusing on the qualitative stuff. But just to give you an idea, so what you're looking at here is the level of support from low to neutral to high. These are the different treatments: pain, transplantation to pigs, smoking, Parkinson's, cancer, etc. And one of the main things that I would like to just point out with this is that there was a slightly higher than average than neutral response. It was around 4.5 is where it was. So neutral was this gray here, and so the average was more around right here. I could draw a line, I guess, but I wouldn't know how to erase it. And you can see that there were differences between the different treatments. I'm not going to get into it too much, because that wasn't the intent of what this was. I did go into it in the paper if you are interested to see. But one of the really interesting things is there was a gender by treatment effect here, where those that identified as women had lower levels of support for virtually all of the for virtually all of the protocols, except for the transplantation one. So again, I don't want to spend any more time on this for time thing, because as numbers people, this is what I know. It happens every time. You guys get sucked into the numbers and you want to like talk about the numbers because you know the numbers. And I am happy to do that, but I want to spend most of this time on the words. So yeah. So anyway, next slide. So, so this is what I want to talk about. So what I love about mixed methods, right, is that you don't just get the what. So the what is the numbers. We asked the people what they thought, the like what their level of support was, and they told us for the various things. And there's very demographic stuff that influences it in the model, and fantastic. But what we get also is the why. We got to ask them, well, why did you answer that? Like, what is that? And it provides this richness of context to their answers. It's so important. So this table shows the themes that were present whenever I analyzed the participant responses, when I asked them to explain why they answered to their level of support. And you can see here they focus on impacts on animals, impacts on humans, scientific merit of the research, and the availability of alternatives. This is what the people talked about. And you can see here that almost 50% of all responses contain the theme of impact on the animals. That is what people were talking about. That is why they answered so 50% of the time, that was the reason they gave for why they answered the way they did. So whenever they talked about the impact of the animals, their responses either whenever they focused on individual animals, they often referenced pain and distress, and suggested that it was immoral to harm other beings. So you can see here, one of the participants said, "It seems like you are purposefully causing pain to a living creature, and it does not seem ethical." There was also, within this theme, reasons that focused on populations of animals. So not just like individual animals, but populations. And these often referenced harm-benefit evaluations, meaning that the study would do more harm than good, or vice versa, more good than harm. You can see this this individual said, "Although I support treating animals humanely, I support scientific advancements and trust that the trials to improve overall well-being." Sometimes responses described the impact on humans, including benefits to humans such as curing disease, drug development, improving treatments, and human safety. This participant said, "Many good outcomes would hopefully follow from this work, including saving lives and improving health." The perceived value or quality of the proposed research was noted by participants as well, including the perceived relevance and the appropriateness of the animal models that are used. These respondents sometimes described an animal species as a good model, but then others would question the translatability of the same model to human therapies. There were participants that described the research as unnecessary. You can see here one says, "It's pretty clear to me the adverse effects of smoking has on pregnancy and children. It just seems like an unnecessary study." But others stress the importance of the same scientific understanding. Any advancement of science and knowledge is valuable to human life. The concept of alternatives in this study from these participants arose in four different forms. Some participants suggested that there is absolutely no suitable alternatives, so the work had to go ahead. Others suggested that there are alternatives and we should use those alternatives rather than the experiment with the animals. The third way that the alternatives came forth was that people recognized that there are not currently alternatives, but did not want the experiments to go forward, and we should invest in finding alternatives, which was interesting as well. And then the fourth one was actually more about pursuing social policy alternatives. So specifically in the smoking scenario, people justified their low levels of support and suggested that the money be spent on society seeking to limit the use of tobacco rather than funding research to treat those that were impacted by it. You can see this person say, "I am not willing to support this research because I feel smoking should be taken away altogether." So I just like to note that nearly 90% of participants provided clear comments during the analysis of this study, showing the potential for this form of online forum to elicit feedback on non-technical summaries. So it is something where the public were able to contribute substantially. So what's my take-home message here? My take-home message is that our online survey allowed for this input from a broad spectrum of the public and showed that the ability to have a diversity of views on the acceptability of different proposed research projects. Many participants provided very thoughtful contributions that can aid in the evaluation of these protocols. And it allows for a broader evaluation beyond just that of the 3 R's. And I think it's important because many participants raised the question of the morality of this form of animal use, namely animal research, right? And this is something that's important for animal care and use committees to consider. And is challenging within the current paradigm of animal research governance, right? A second piece that this study brought forth was that there was a gender by treatment interaction, right? And it suggests that women consider certain types of harm especially egregious, or could be that they are simply more cautious in their assessment of benefits. And additional studies are going to be needed to be able to really tweeze out the specifics of these gender differences. And I just would like to take from to stress from this that it emphasizes the importance of considering gender composition within animal care and use committees, because the research and the literature shows that there is differences, and these differences need to be allowed to be present in committees. So the overarching result from this is that institutions that conduct studies on animals and perhaps even actually maybe other ethically contentious issues like on vulnerable human populations could integrate this sort of information into institutional decision making. And this input could be used to identify problematic areas of research. For example, things around severe suffering or even contentious species that are being used. And this can help institutions reduce the risk that their research practices fall out of step with community values, right? And how else can the public contribute? Well, problematic areas of research. They can help contribute by letting us know if what they think is occurring in a regulatory setting is actually what is occurring, right, for the use of animals in scientific research. So what I did was, so this study is about using invertebrates and what impact it has to not have regulatory oversight and ethical oversight for invertebrates used for scientific research. And when I think about, when we think about how we got to do this study, most of the debates around the moral consideration to provide animals, specifically invertebrates here, is based around sentience, right? And I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not a physiologist. I'm an animal welfare scientist. I utilize social science methodologies. So evaluating sentience in animals is not my expertise. However, one thing that I do like when reviewing the literature and looking through this stuff and how it's evolved over time, one of the things that I do believe is that declaring an animal sentient or not sentient changes over time. And it makes me wonder is it that animals that are not sentient today are actually not sentient, or is it that we are just not capable of detecting their sentience for whatever reason that is? It makes me think about fish. At some point, they didn't experience pain, they weren't sentient, they didn't deserve moral consideration. Octopus, other cephalopods, now even decapods, right? And so, as I said, this is not my expertise, so I didn't want to explore this topic because I didn't think I could actually contribute in any meaningful way. But what I did think I could contribute in is that I could ask the Canadian public, and I could focus on the social license to use animals for scientific purposes, and how not having ethical and regulatory oversight for the use of these animals impacts the confidence in the regulatory system and the trust in scientists. Yeah. So what did I do? So I did another mixed methods survey and gave 959 Canadian participants a survey that was census matched to the Canadian population, and they were randomly allocated into one of four treatments. Each describing a tissue biopsy from either a mouse, a fish, zebrafish specifically, a grasshopper, or a sea star. And oversight, regulatory and ethical oversight was present for the vertebrate species and not present for the invertebrate species. And then on a 7-point scale, we asked them about their expectations for what they thought oversight should be for invertebrates, their confidence in the regulatory oversight system, and then their trust in scientists conducting animal experiments. So this is a figure that presents the Likert data, and I'll take a moment to explain it here. You can see here on the right here, you can see that participants that said there should be no level of oversight for invertebrates. It's here, half, and then say 100% is the same. So you can see that about 20% of participants thought that invertebrates should receive about half of the oversight that vertebrates have. About 10% thought less than that, and about sorry, my math is like out of my brain here. That makes it 65% thought it should be more than half. And kind of overall, it was at about 2/3 or 67%, which is what this line is here. And these are just for the different ones here. But again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I want to get into the qualitative data because I've been just talking way too much. So the So similar to the first study, the mixed methods offers this richness in context, right? And it's very, very important to, excuse me, it's super duper important to ask them the why. The why is so important. And you can see here that value of life. So why did they expect whatever level they expected of oversight for invertebrates? And it centered around this value for life. There was also animal experience. It was centered around that, participant reflections, and oversight system. So we're just going to focus on these first two here because that made up 65% of participants' references whenever asked about why they needed to have the level of oversight they did. So some participants explained their level of oversight for invertebrate animals with this concept that all life matters. And that you can see here, one participant said, life deserves dignity, even if it's not the same as our own. Whereas others reflected on the differences between animals, and they justified these responses with, I feel most invertebrates experience less complex emotions that might apply to other vertebrates. So, oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. I've only got a little bit more here. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this here. Okay, so the other piece that they talked about with the animal experiences, they talked about how we cannot be vertebrate-centric. We need to assume that others do not feel pain and distress. And then other people also said that they believe that invertebrates do not feel pain and should not have the oversight. So it was a mixed thing of reasons, but on a shared value sense, the value of life was important, and same with the animal experience. So given the time that I have here, I've just been talking way too much. I got to skip through a whole bunch of these slides, and I'm happy to talk about this. This publication is going to be, it's been submitted and it's going to be out soon. So what did I want to say about this? So my take-home message on this study was that there are gaps that exist between the current and public expectations for the oversight of invertebrates, and scientists that wish to continue to use these animals need to reflect on ways for their processes to reflect societal values, and it may require some sort of integration of some sort of ethical and regulatory oversight into invertebrates. One thing that is left unanswered with this study is that they don't say what that actually means, okay? So it's important to make sure that we explore that further with additional research to find out what they mean by 2/3 oversight. Okay, so I need to skip through all of this. Okay, so and then there was some other research here. So looping back to my original outline. Oh, just fired through that. In summary, I think it's important to know that social sciences and humanities were always intended to be a part of lab animal science, okay? I've provided these research examples and that demonstrate the value of the theories and methods that can be used for answering these wicked problems, and begin to tweeze apart questions that currently can't be answered with methodologies that are utilized in lab animal science. But the good news is that lab animal science doesn't need to have all of the answers or expertise. There are scholars recognizing the importance of formalized multidisciplinary collaborations in this area. And together, all of us together, we can begin to find ways on how to answer these challenging questions that are often value laden. And we'll do this together. The invitation to speak here today, Philasa even had a panel dedicated to these cross-disciplinary topics, and other traditional disciplines like animal agriculture are recognizing that complex, value-laden questions need to be addressed from various positions. And I think this is great for lab animal science as it begins to build a bridge across this chasm that CP Snow had described, and begin to allow the full potential for humane experimental technique to be realized as was intended by Russell and Birch, right? Through this joint collaboration of social sciences, and humanities within a united academy, right? So, as much as I hope that there's time for questions, I recognize I've utilized all my time in talking. So please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you. All the best.